Welcome. It is Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz, Ben Ferguson with you, and I hope your Thanksgiving week has been incredible with your family. Safe travels out there. Senator, we've got actually a lot to talk about. Usually it's a slow week during the holidays, not so much this week at all.
Well, there's a lot going on, but I want to start by just saying this week of Thanksgiving, I hope you took a minute to just hug your family. Hug your wife, hug your husband, hug your kids. Let your kids know why you love them, what they mean to you. If your mom and dad are still with you, tell them, my parents, my mom is just turned 91, my dad is 86. Like, the moments with family, these holidays are so important. Love them and give thanks. Like, we have so much to give thanks for. We have so much to give thanks for being Americans, for those of us who are blessed to be Texans. We have even more to give thanks for. We have thanks for our liberty. We have thanks for American free enterprise. We have thanks for the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, our fundamental liberties. And so I hope in this time, look, it's so easy. Life goes so fast. It goes so crazy. You're going a million miles an hour. Everything distracts you. I hope during this week you take a minute to sit down and play a game with your kids. You take a minute. My daughters have started liking to play poker. I love to play poker. And just sitting down, like playing poker, playing Monopoly, playing backgammon, playing chess, playing Uno, playing charades, like those moments are priceless. And so, yes, there's a lot going on, and we're going to talk about all of that. But I really do, God has blessed this nation incredibly. And if you are fortunate enough to be healthy, if you are fortunate enough to, like you and I are, Ben, to be dads.
Amen to that.
Being a dad, what an incredible privilege. What an incredible, like watching your kids grow up, watching your kids express strong, passionate views. Just take this week and Christmas week are I think, the two most important weeks to just love on your kids. And so that's something I just want to encourage you. You're listening to a podcast, that's great, that's be engaged, but don't take the time away from your family and your kids, especially this week.
Amen to that. Couldn't agree with you more. As we and by the way, with poker, who's better? I got to ask. Is it you, or are they taking your money yet? I got to know that.
So I got to say, Caroline, my oldest daughter, has become a pretty good little poker player, and she's got her boyfriend Bruce. They like playing poker with me. This summer we went to Lake Powell. In Nevada and Utah, and Lake Powell is gorgeous. It's basically the Grand Canyon filled up halfway with water. And my father-in-law has a houseboat. He's had a houseboat for 30 years. And you get out on the houseboat and you tow a water ski boat, you tow a jet ski, and you just get out there and spend a week. And there's no phone, there's no internet. It's disconnected from the world. And, you get out there, you water ski, you jet ski, you swim, you jump off the top of the houseboat. By the way, my brother-in-law, you want to talk about a badass trick? My brother-in-law has a trick where he stands on the top of the houseboat. He holds the rope from the water ski, and his wife gets in the water ski boat, and she punches it. He jumps off the second story of the houseboat. He lands on his rear end. He goes underwater, goes about 6-8 feet underwater, and he pops up in barefoots. It is a crazy-ass trick.
That's so cool.
And I got to say, like we did that this summer, spent a week, and that's where Caroline and Bruce said, hey, Dad, you really like to play poker. Can you teach us to play? And so we sat there. We had a bunch of, bottle caps and used bottle caps as chips.
Yeah.
We didn't play for money, but we played every night, and it was every night from 10 p.m. to 1 in the morning we played poker. And that was, when I was a little kid, my grandmother, when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, she taught me to play poker. And she was an incredible card player. She played bridge every week she lived into her 80s. She probably played 70 years worth of bridge. But she taught me to play poker. She had a tin of buttons, and we would use the buttons as chips. And she had some costume jewelry that were fake diamonds. So I would, 8 years old, I'd say $1 million, and I'd throw out a diamond chip. And for 2 years, I won every time. She'd babysit me when my parents went out, and if they wanted to have a date night or something, they'd drop me off at Granny's house, and we'd sit there and play poker. And after a couple of years of doing it, and I'd won over and over again, I came to her, I said, Granny, let's play for real money. And I had $5. And Ben, at the time, my allowance was 50 cents a week. So $5 was 10 weeks allowance. It was a ton of money. And she said, sure, absolutely happy to. So we sat down, played poker. She cleaned me out.
Yep, that's an important lesson in life, is not winning money, but losing money, because it keeps you in check, I think, forever.
Oh, when my parents picked me up, I was there crying. And my Irish grandmother was laughing as she sent me home and said, well, Sonny, you want to play for money? Let me know next time you want to do it.
That's and she didn't give it back, which is the reason why you learned your lesson.
Oh, no.
Right?
No, I never got that $5 back.
That's so good. I love it. I got twin boys. Georgie is my game player. He's obsessed. All Thanksgiving break, we've been playing poker. He loves it. And he grins because we have poker chips. We don't play for money. Just
Hold'em, or what are you playing?
We're playing Texas Hold'em, yeah. And he loves it. He's 6 years old, but he's really good with numbers. He loves playing blackjack. Same thing. We'll use chips, and whoever wins just has the bragging rights at the table. We all start with the same amount. But at 6 years old, he started whooping my dad, and my sister's boyfriend lost to him this morning, which really made me laugh because he's so proud of himself at 6. I get this game. This is so fun. But like you said, spending time with the fam over the holidays, playing card games, Uno, whatever it is, do it with your kids, because those are the memories you remember for the rest of your life.
And by the way, I got to say, Cubans, what we do on holidays is we play dominoes. And Cubans playing dominoes, number one, so we don't play double six dominoes. Double six dominoes are common in Mexico, much of the Caribbean. But Cubans play double nine dominoes. And double nine dominoes is a lot more complicated because you got a lot more numbers to think through. And my grandfather, my abuelo, he could play dominoes. In fact, we still have these wooden domino trays that he made in his wood shop that we play with to this day. And he was such a good domino player that after 4 rounds, he could tell you what dominoes every person around the table had. It was freakishly good.
I don't have that. Do you have that type of memory? I just don't.
I have some of it, but not at the... So when it comes to poker, one of my best friends in the world is actually an amateur professional poker player. So yeah. He has played multiple World Series of poker, and I played with him a ton. And it's interesting, when he and I play, he gets pissed because he's very, very good at the math. He knows the math of every hand. Here are the outs. Here's the percentages. I'm okay at the math. I don't have the percentages down like it's 37%, but I have this percentages notionally right. I have a pretty good sense of the math, but it's not exact. What I play is I read the other players. So this buddy of mine who's was a groomsman at my wedding, one of my closest friends, we'll play, and we probably played 100 poker games together, and my guess is I won about half and he's won about half. And it drives him crazy because I'll make plays, and he's like, what the hell are you doing? You can't do that. The math didn't make sense. And I'll look at him and say, Adam, I did it because you didn't want me to. Because when I'm playing poker, the biggest thing I'm doing is I'm looking in the eyes of the other people. I'm trying to figure out, what do you want? And I'm going to do the opposite of what you want. And so it's, look, what's fun about poker is you have the math and skill of it, but you also have the people reading. And that's a blast. And I got to say, I'm really proud because my daughter, Caroline, she's good at both of that. I mean, she's still a new poker player, but she's good at reading people. That's awesome.
Donald Trump has begun the process, Senator, of designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. This is something that you've been advocating for, talking about. We've talked about on the show for quite some time. They've also been doing this in Texas, and now we're seeing it become part 2 nationwide. Your reaction?
So, look, this is massively important. President Trump announced this week that he's going to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. I have literally been fighting for this to happen for 10 years. It has been 5 different Congresses that I've introduced legislation directing the federal government to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. We came really, really close in the first Trump administration. I was pushing this. I had legislation. I was fighting for it. And the reason we fell just short, and the reason we fell just short is the deep state and the State Department, they did not want to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. And the old version of the legislation I filed was a top-down. So what it did is it directed the State Department and the administration to designate the global Muslim Brotherhood, the umbrella organization, as a terrorist organization. And what happened was the deep state bureaucrats, they argued, well, it is not definitively proven that every single Muslim Brotherhood affiliate across the globe is a terrorist organization. Some of them clearly are, but it's not proven that all of them are. And that argument at the end of the day stopped Trump 1 from doing this. So Trump 2 starts, and I leaned in again, and I said, all right, we're going to get this done. And I redrafted the legislation to pick a totally different approach. Instead of being top-down, I went bottom-up. And I said, look, the State Department is directed to designate the individual Muslim Brotherhood affiliates that are terrorist organizations, designate them as such. So, for example, Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. There is zero dispute that Hamas is a terrorist organization. And so my legislation said designate the individual affiliates, whichever ones that there's clear and definitive proof they're terrorist organizations, and then designate the global Muslim Brotherhood for material support for those terrorist organizations, because the global organization funds every one of their affiliates. And so it was a fundamental shift. And at the end of the day, I think it's unlikely Congress will pass my legislation, because to pass it, I need 60 Democrats and I need 60 senators. I need at least 7 Democrats. And I think it's unlikely we'll get 7 Democrats. I've got 1, so the legislation in the Senate is Cruz Fetterman, so John Fetterman has joined me. But to get to 7 is not easy. But I've been fighting this fight because I want to build the momentum for the president to do what he did this week. And what he did this week is exactly what my legislation says, which is he directed the State Department to designate the individual affiliates, the lower organizations that are clearly terrorist organizations. And I'll tell you, Seb Gorka is the head of counterterrorism, the National Security Council. Seb is an old friend. I have met with Seb and talked at length about making this happen. And then just 3 weeks ago, I was at the White House. I was with President Trump. It was right after he had designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern because Boko Haram and radical Islamic terrorists were murdering Christians. More than 50,000 Christians have been murdered in Nigeria. And I've been fighting to designate Nigeria for a long time. And so I told the president right after he did that, I said, thank you for designating Nigeria. Really big deal, enormously important. And he responded to me. He said, great, Ted, happy to do it. He said, is there anyone else we should designate? What else should we do? And I said, the Muslim Brotherhood. We should designate the Muslim Brotherhood. And he said to me 3 weeks ago, I'm happy to do it. We'll get it done. This week he got it done. It is a big deal. This is literally 10 years of hard work, and it will make America safer because the Muslim Brotherhood is funding terrorists that want to murder you and want to murder me.
Yeah, it is not just, as you mentioned, a big deal. It's a national security issue. And there's also been a very weird quietness online on this. There are some members of the Democratic Party that are acting as if the Muslim Brotherhood really shouldn't be designated as a terrorist organization.
Hello?
It might be one of the weirdest things I've ever seen on social media happen, and yet here we are witnessing it in real time as they're like, well, hold on a second, why would we really need to do this? I'm like, what world are you living in? Are you kidding me?
Well, and many of our allies in the Middle East already understand the threat. So, for example, the global Muslim Brotherhood is outlawed as a terrorist group by Bahrain, by Egypt, by Jordan, by Saudi Arabia, and by the UAE. I've spoke with the governments of those countries. They really want the United States to do what President Trump did this week, which is designate the Muslim Brotherhood. Austria has also banned the group. Germany is considering legislation to do the same. French intelligence has described the Muslim Brotherhood as, quote, a threat to national cohesion, and the British officials say the Muslim Brotherhood is subject to surveillance under Britain's anti-extremism laws. So there is a growing movement to recognize that the Muslim Brotherhood is promoting terrorism. Terrorism that is trying to kill Americans, terrorism that's trying to kill Europeans, terrorism that is trying to kill Israelis. And designating a group as a terrorist organization unleashes a host of tools, including sanctions and direct military action that we can take against them. And this is, as I said, it has been 10 years I've been fighting for this to happen. I want to credit President Trump. Here's what the Wall Street Journal editorial board wrote about it. Wall Street Journal editorial board said, quote, nearly a quarter century after 9/11, the U.S. has taken aim at a leading incubator of Islamic terrorism, the Muslim Brotherhood. Previous attempts to proscribe the group, including by the first Trump administration, were stymied by the Brotherhood's loose structure. On Monday, President Trump signed an executive order to begin the process of designating the Brotherhood branches as terrorist organizations. Branches in Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon are singled out for a 30-day review, though the order isn't limited to them. This is a big deal. America is safer. Thank you, President Trump.
All right, so there's another thing this week, Senator, and it really, rarely do headlines like actually genuinely tick me off. Well, I'm a cynical guy, but there was one this week with the New York Times, and it infuriated
Ben, I'm
me.
gonna call BS on that. I'm going to call BS on that.
You think the New York Times didn't irritate me this week?
Yeah, I know you too well. Has there been a day in the past year when there was not a headline that pissed you off?
Yes. Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving. Probably because I'm not reading the news then.
So the days you don't read the headlines. I'm just saying, they piss you off every day, but I will admit, this was particularly infuriating.
Okay, good. So you're back on my team on this one. I like this. So there's this story.
On team, Ben.
You're always on my team. You're a constructive criticism teammate. That's how I would describe you. So the New York Times comes out with this headline, this story that's actually supposed to make you, as an American citizen, feel sorry for an undocumented worker. They call it that. I call it an illegal immigrant that stole an American's identity. And they say, well, there's two men that paid a price. And they also refer to the identity as a individual, like one, like two become one, like they're married. It is the most insane propaganda, even from the New York Times standard.
Well, all across the country, there are thousands of people who've had their identity stolen by illegal immigrants. And it is causing real pain. It's causing real chaos. Ironically, the New York Times, in the midst of their propaganda piece, accidentally reported the news and talked about the devastating consequences. Now, of course, what they said is that if an illegal immigrant steals your identity, the illegal alien is a victim and not just you. So let's just read the beginning of this article, because it's one that will make your head explode. The title, Two Men, One Identity. They both paid the price. Thousands of undocumented workers rely on fraudulent Social Security numbers. One of them belonged to Dan Kluver. Dan Kluver saw the police lights flashing in his rearview mirror late last year and eased his car onto the shoulder, thinking there had been some kind of mistake. He had spent 4 decades in rural Minnesota without ever getting into trouble. He prided himself on a life built around dependability and routine, working at the same factory where his father once did and spending his weekends coaching baseball and teaching Sunday school. He had never fired a gun or smoked a cigarette or missed a payment or had been arrested. By the way, I'm not sure I believe that he's never fired a gun. The guy's in rural Minnesota. That sounds like a New York Times BS statement. But leave that as aside. Quote, license and registration, please, the officer said. Kluver, 42, handed them over and waited while the officer went back to his patrol car. He listened to the church bells that rang every hour and watched the sunlight reflect off the grain silos in downtown Olivia, where he knew most of the 2,400 residents, including the officer who was walking back to his car. Is everything all right? Kluver asked. It's strange, but it looks like your license has been suspended. You've got another driver's license with some issues down in Missouri. What? Kluver said. I've barely ever been to Missouri. How is that possible? The officer had no answers, but Kluver feared he might know what was happening. Over the years, there had been signs that something wasn't right. Stray letters about wages earned in unfamiliar towns, and collection notices for debt that wasn't his. Kluver had tried to untangle the mess several times by hiring tax specialists and driving to government offices across the state, only to run into the same bureaucratic dead ends. But now the problem was bigger than unpaid taxes. Somebody was impersonating him, moving through the world as Dan Kluver, building a life in his name with a government-issued ID. His problem was one version of a problem that's been spreading across the country for years. The government estimates that as many as 1 million undocumented workers are using fraudulent or stolen Social Security numbers. Let me repeat that. The government estimates that as many as 1 million undocumented workers are using fraudulent or stolen Social Security numbers. A survival tactic, of course, a survivor tactic. They're just stealing because they want to survive. Used to pass background checks and get jobs. The numbers are skimmed from data breaches, sold in the black market online for as little as $150, or handed out in border towns by human smugglers. Many numbers connect back to U.S. citizen children, dead people, or Puerto Ricans whose numbers circulate easily across the mainland. But thousands of others belong to people like Kluver, Americans whose names and identities are no longer theirs alone. The police officer sent Kluver home with a warning, and he sifted through file cabinets with his wife, Christy, searching for clues about the other Dan Kluver. His Social Security card was safely locked away alongside birth certificates for their 3 children. He'd never been robbed or even lost his wallet, but there was his number printed on a W-2 from a leather factory in a town he never visited. He traced 15 years of records and found more tax documents listing unfamiliar jobs. At a cement plant in Kansas, a paper mill in Tennessee, a construction company in Ohio, a cereal factory in Nebraska, and a dog food plant in Missouri. How do you think you've been getting between all these places? Christy asked. It's eerie. It's like I've lost all control over who I am, Kluver said. Some years, the other Dan Kluver had earned more than his own salary at a local sugar beet factory, which pushed the total income under a Social Security number into a higher tax bracket as the debts started to mount. Twice he'd contacted law enforcement and filed an identity theft report with the federal government. He waited for relief while the IRS docked his annual tax returns and garnished a few of his paychecks, costing him thousands. Finally, a few months before their wedding in 2012, Christy decided to pay off the balance, emptying her savings and sending a check for $6,000. Their relief lasted until the next tax season, when a new bill arrived, this one for $22,000. They spent the next decade living with the consequences. Annual tax audits, budgets that never added up, whispered arguments after the kids went to bed. Kluver kept calling government numbers and waiting on hold until he eventually resigned himself to a payment plan. He agreed to send the IRS $150 each month, which he'd done more than 35 times. I can't keep obsessing over this and getting nowhere, he told Christy. I need to think about something else. That is going on, and yet the New York Times at the same time described the person who'd stolen his identity. He had lived under enough names and numbers in the United States that they started to blur together. Vincent Trujillo, Reynaldo Guerra, and then, for more than a decade, Daniel Kluver, the name he'd used until he could barely remember what it felt like to exist as himself. Romeo Perez Bravo, 42, a Guatemalan immigrant who has spent most of his adult life working under borrowed identities, borrowed being the fake name for stolen. By the start of 2025, he was preparing for another graveyard shift in St. Joseph, Missouri, lacing his work boots in the darkness and his drafty rental while his wife and 5 children slept. He packed their school lunches the next day, drove to the dog food factory, and gathered with his co-workers to say their nightly prayer. Then he swiped his badge to begin another 12-hour shift as Daniel Kluver, sinking deeper into an identity that wasn't really his own. Daniel, his boss always shouted, taking attendance before they went to their lines. Here, he said. Perez Bravo had come to the United States for the first time at 16 to help earn money for his family, traveling alone to join his father in Marshall, Minnesota. He hiked out of the Guatemalan highlands, rode atop a freight train for 3 weeks across Mexico, nearly drowned in the Rio Grande, and took a Greyhound to Middle America, where life somehow felt harder. He slept on a couch in his father's apartment and enrolled in high school despite speaking almost no English. Then he began to look for a job, but no one would hire an underage worker without papers. The entire story goes on to say, this guy, who has stolen the identity of a poor working man in Minnesota, he's the victim, despite the fact that Daniel Kluver, the real Daniel Kluver, is paying IRS debts. His credit has been ruined. It has been a nightmare for him, and yet for the New York Times, they say it's one identity. The poor guy that stole his identity is really the victim. It is an infuriating example of propaganda. And let me go back to the stat that I read. More than 1 million illegal immigrants have stolen identities of Americans. And Americans are hurting all over the country. And the New York Times is saying, you too should have your identity stolen. You too should pay the price. You too should pay IRS bills that you don't owe because an illegal immigrant stole your identity. And by the way, that illegal immigrant's the victim, not you.
Senator, finally on the show, let's deal with a major problem. It's huge. A university is now warning of a quote-unquote whiteness pandemic. Not a problem, but a pandemic, a whiteness pandemic. This coming from the University of Minnesota. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I got to say, this is going to piss you off. Are you white? Then apparently you are an evil, noxious scourge on America. You are a pandemic. You are a virus. You are a disease. And woke leftists are going to re-educate the whiteness right out of you. Like, I wish I were making this up. Like, when I say these words, you sound like a lunatic. You sound like you're wearing like a tinfoil hat and you believe in conspiracy theories. But I want to read to you from a website from the University of Minnesota. By the way, this is a state website. This is, all right, here's what the website says. Quote, "What is the whiteness pandemic? Racism is an epidemic that can also be considered a pandemic given its large cross-national proportion and spread. However, there is another pandemic lurking behind and driving the racist pandemic, the whiteness pandemic. Whiteness refers to culture, not biology. The centuries-old culture of whiteness features colorblindness. In other words, not being a racist, that is the whiteness pandemic. Passivity and white fragility were all covert expressions of racism common in the United States. Naming the whiteness pandemic shifts our gaze from the victims and effects of racism onto the systems that perpetrate and perpetuate racism, starting with the family system. In other words, families are racist. If you believe in families, if you believe in a mom and dad raising kids, loving kids, that is, the family system is part of the whiteness pandemic. At birth, young children growing up in white families begin to be socialized into the culture of whiteness, making the family system one of the most powerful systems involved in systemic racism. This is open. We hate families is what the University of Minnesota is saying. And okay, what's the next section? Quote, how do we halt and reverse the whiteness pandemic? If you were born and raised in the United States, you have grown up in the whiteness pandemic, and you can play a role in halting or reversing this pandemic, especially if you are white, because of the power and privilege you hold in this racialized society. If you were socialized into the culture of whiteness during your childhood, it is not your fault. But as an adult, it is now your responsibility to self-reflect, to re-educate yourself, and act. If you are a white adult, anti-racist action involves an ongoing process of self-reflection in order to develop a healthy, positive white identity while encouraging courageous, anti-racist parenting/caregiving. What utter and complete garbage, what racist, leftist, communist dreck. And this is the University of Minnesota. By the way, look, there are like great people in Minnesota. They're great people in every state, and yet these people are racist radicals. And this is what they're indoctrinating our children with.
Not only they indoctrinate our children, but this is where a lot of our dollars, our tax dollars go, which is the other frustrating part, that this is what they're indoctrinating them with.
Undoubtedly. And by the way, our podcast on Monday, so we do this podcast 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Our podcast on Monday talked about what is the number one funder of Al-Shabaab, the radical Islamist terrorist group. And the answer, terrifyingly enough, is the taxpayers of the state of Minnesota. So Minnesota has a huge Somali community. Somalis have invaded the state of Minnesota. It's how you elect Ilhan Omar, who actively is anti-American, racist, radical, embraces and supports radical Islamic terrorists. And the Somali community sends billions every year back to Somalia. And millions of that money sent back ends up directly in the pockets, in the coffers of al-Shabaab. And it is the Minnesota state taxpayers. So we detailed this on Monday, how welfare fraud, fraudulent collection of welfare payments, an entire welfare system set up seemingly on the face of it to encourage fraud, to facilitate fraud, is resulting in Minnesota taxpayers sending millions of dollars to radical Islamic terrorists. This is the same ideology. Like, what do you do if you happen to be a white kid at the University of Minnesota? You show up and be told, by the way, you're just, you're a 17, 18-year-old kid. You show up as a freshman. And if you're white, you're told you're a pandemic, you're a virus, and the only answer is re-educate yourself, because who you are, who America is, and understand this screed against, quote, anti-whiteness is also a screed against America. That these Marxists hate the United States of America, they hate the Constitution, they hate our freedoms, and this garbage that is anti-racism, this garbage that is DEI, this garbage that says we must institutionalize. By the way, the fix for the for the whiteness pandemic is to discriminate against anyone who is white, is to institutionalize racism, and that is grotesque. It is wrong. It is contrary to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which provides the equal protection of the law to all people, regardless of race. It is contrary to the founding notions of this country. The Declaration said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, not some, not just white people, not just black people, not anyone. All men and all women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what this country was built on, and these Marxists who have taken over our institutions hate that notion, and this kind of garbage is being spewed to our children and being used to brainwash our children at a massive rate.
I tell this all the time to parents when they ask, be careful where you send your kids to college, because they could be indoctrinated to literally hate this country. Yep. This is another example
and to
of
hate
exactly
you,
that.
To hate their mom and dad.
Yeah.
But by the way, what I just read, the family system, they are attacking families. They're telling your kids family is evil. That's what Marxists believe.
Yeah, amen. Don't forget, we do this show as a podcast Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so make sure you hit that subscribe or that auto download button wherever you get your podcast. If you like to watch the show, you can do that on YouTube as well, as most of the episodes we do as a video podcast as well. So on YouTube, you can grab it there. And also, you can catch the show on the radio station that you're listening to right now each and every weekend. So make sure you download Verdict with Ted Cruz wherever you get your podcasts. Ben Ferguson, it's been a pleasure to be with you. Be safe out there on the roads with this Thanksgiving holiday weekend, and we'll see you back here real soon.